After our marriage, everyone said I was incredibly lucky. My husband, Marcus, cherished me like a treasure. Once I truly believed we could grow old together hand in hand. But on the very night of the dance troupe's lead solo audition, he locked me in the basement for another woman. I lost my final chance, and all I got in return was the cold indifference of the man who had promised to love me. Chapter 1. It's just an audition, isn't it? So what if you missed it? Why are you crying like this? The basement door finally creaked open. The light from outside stung my eyes. Ruby, my sister-in-law, stood there with her arms crossed, her face full of impatience as she scolded me. Look at yourself. Do you really think someone like you is good enough for my brother? Though I'd been her sister-in-law for 12 years, in Ruby's eyes, I had never been worthy of her beloved brother. I stumbled out of the basement, my legs weak beneath me. The sight that greeted me made my heart stop. This wasn't the fiery inferno that had taken my life. Instead, Marcus stood before me, tall and composed, looking far younger than I remembered. But the slight furrow of his brows as he looked at me was all too familiar. Chapter 2. Can you stop making a scene? He rubbed the bridge of his nose, his handsome face, once so captivating to me, now tinged with weariness. I clenched my fists, trying to steady my trembling body. Seeing Marcus again, I felt no relief, only a dull ache where my heart used to be. I shoved past him at the doorway and staggered down the steps. Snow drifted softly from the sky. I closed my eyes, taking in deep gulps of the icy air. This wasn't a hallucination before death. I was alive again. You're being ridiculous. Suddenly, I was pulled into a familiar embrace, warm and solid. Before I could react, I was led into a cozy room. My eyes landed on a vase holding a rare bunch of winter lilies. I lowered my gaze. I had always loved fiery red roses. The lilies, on the other hand, were her favorite, Lily, his childhood sweetheart. In my past life, I had foolishly demanded he replace them with roses, not knowing that it wasn't just a flower he cherished, but the memory of her. I still remembered the coldness in his eyes when he had refused me. Must you always be so petty? It's just a flower, Grace. Why do you have to make such a big deal out of it? Was it really just about a flower? I asked myself. Since our marriage, I had poured my heart and soul into him, into us. But I hadn't known that all along. His heart had belonged to someone else. I had fought, I had cried. I had demanded that he choose between me and Lily. What I got in return was years of silent torment and the mocking whispers of others. Crazy. Jealous. A shrew. After an entire lifetime of clinging to him, my love for him had worn away to nothing. Marcus, I'm done. I stepped out of his embrace. Don't worry. I won't act like that anymore. For a moment, Marcus seemed taken aback. His arms hung empty as he watched me with a faint sense of loss. Chapter 3. This was the house we'd lived in after our marriage. Ruby stormed off in a huff, muttering about how I was always causing trouble for her brother. Don't say things like that. For once, Marcus actually defended me. But I didn't even glance back at him. Instead, I returned to my room. A few minutes later, he knocked on my door. When I opened it, he was holding a steaming cup in his hands. I made some ginger tea with brown sugar. It'll help with the chill. Hiding under my blanket, I pressed my lips together. To the outside world, Marcus was aloof and unapproachable. But at home, he had always been attentive and considerate toward me. That was why I had fallen for him so completely. But all of that care came with one unspoken condition. I could never touch the subject of Lily. He knew how hard I had worked for years to get the lead soloist position in the dance troupe. But because Lily was my rival, he had locked me in that damp, freezing basement on the day of the audition. I took the cup from him. In my previous life, I had spent an entire day locked up, wearing nothing but a thin practice outfit, overwhelmed by despair and heartbreak. When I finally got out, I had fought with Marcus, unaware that I was already running a high fever. This time I refused to make the same mistakes. My body was my own. Marcus seemed surprised by my compliance, his lips pressing into a thin line. "Drink slowly," he said. I ignored his words, silently finishing the tea before retreating back under the blanket. He stood there for a long moment before finally speaking. "You can't keep shutting me out like this." Chapter 4. I've told you before, Grace. You're an adult now. You can't keep acting like a child. Marcus pinched the bridge of his nose, his tone tinged with frustration. I was 3 years younger than him. Mature and reserved, he had always indulged me in the past, though he was never good with words. This was the first time he had ever explained himself so thoroughly. "Lily and I don't have the kind of relationship you think we do," he said. "Her parents died saving mine, and after that, her relatives took her back to her hometown. She had to fight her way out of the mountains on her own. Compared to you, she needs this opportunity more." In Marcus's eyes, the fact that Lily had managed to escape the cruel grip of fate and rise to shine on the stage despite such harsh conditions was nothing short of remarkable. Their eventual reunion must have been a journey paved with untold pain and hardship. When they finally recognized each other, Lily recounted her past with a bittersweet smile, tears lacing her voice. It was then that Marcus truly understood just how difficult her path had been. "She's 2 years older than you. If she fails this time, there won't be another chance for her. I know what I did wasn't fair to you, but you still have opportunities ahead. If she doesn't succeed, her life is as good as over." He turned to me, his gaze carrying a pain he couldn't articulate. "Grace, you understand me, don't you?" Perhaps I was too composed. If this had been before, I would have yelled and screamed at him. He would have dismissed me as childish and immature. But now he seemed desperate for my forgiveness. Marcus pitied his childhood friend, but he failed to see that his misplaced compassion had cast me into a living hell. I had questioned myself countless times. Had I made a mistake? Should I never have competed with Lily for that position? Even my own husband condemned me. Perhaps I truly was beyond redemption. My torment was invisible to everyone because those closest to me had never spared even a hint of empathy for my suffering. I straightened my back and locked eyes with him. "What about me? Does the 3 years I've spent striving tirelessly for a chance mean so little to you?" Marcus's eyes flinched with panic as he gripped my shoulders tightly. "No, Grace, it's not like that. I just didn't want you to go down the wrong path." I let out a cold laugh and shrugged off his hands. "Really? Just because of her accusations, you believed I stole her choreography. You even gave her the dress my mother left me. Have you ever considered that the song was based on my mother's hometown melody? Or how much that dress meant to me? All you could see was your childhood friend needing compensation, and I just happened to be the perfect sacrifice. Now I'm a laughingstock, branded as a thief who stole someone else's work. My career, my reputation, they were destroyed overnight. And to top it off, you locked me in the basement for an entire day just to appease her. You crushed my dreams, Marcus. What gave you the right to be so cruel to me?" I should have said these words in my past life. Tears streamed down my face as I shouted, my voice hoarse, while Marcus stared at me in stunned silence. "Because you never truly loved me. That's why nothing about me has ever mattered to you." These words had been bottled up inside me for far too long. I had compromised and conceded again and again out of fear of losing him. But what did that get me? Years of neglect and endless disappointment. Suddenly, Marcus pulled me into a fierce embrace. Once I would have yearned for his warmth, but now all I felt was suffocation, like a fish stranded on the beach, gasping for air. He clung to me as if terrified I would slip away, repeating over and over, "It's not like that, Grace. You've misunderstood. You can stop dancing. It doesn't matter. You still have me." Chapter 5. But his words only brought memories of my past life flooding back. After that selection, Lily had achieved her dream of becoming the lead dancer, while I was expelled from the troupe under the stigma of being a thief. I refused to accept it and searched desperately for opportunities. But in this world, reputation was everything. Even when someone recognized my talent, the moment they learned why I had been dismissed, they would have nothing to do with me. Later, I was in a car accident. Even after recovering, I could no longer return to the stage. During that time, Marcus did stay by my side, unwavering. I thought perhaps I should just let it go. But while I was convalescing at home, Lily's name became a constant presence. She began to dominate conversations among Marcus's family, who praised her talent, her dedication, and her growing list of accolades. No one remembered that the dance she performed had been one I'd spent 2 weeks sleeplessly choreographing. Instead, after praising Lily, they would turn to mock me, the failure and the thief. Rumors spread like wildfire. Living under the weight of such lies left me sleepless, terrified of social interactions, and unable to step outside alone. I became nothing more than a burden to Marcus. Everyone who saw him pitied him for being saddled with such a useless wife. If only you'd married Lily instead. I'd heard those words countless times. First they broke my heart. Then I grew numb. I had endured enough of that life. Taking a deep breath, I struggled out of his arms. Let me think about it. Chapter 6. Mark, is Grace home? Outside, Lily's soft voice floated into the room. Marcus glanced at me before stepping out of the bedroom. She's home. Why are you here? Compared to me, he was so much more at ease with her. I watched as they entered the room together. The tall man had a faint smile on his lips, his gaze fixed unwaveringly on the delicate woman beside him. Lily had striking, captivating features, her smile deepened by a pair of dimples that could easily soften anyone's guard. When she saw me lying on the bed, she playfully raised her fist and gave Marcus a gentle nudge on the arm. Look at you, always so inconsiderate. I watched them, their intimacy as natural as if no one else existed. And yet, my heart remained still, devoid of any ripple. Lily swung her backpack off her shoulder and placed it carefully by the bedside. By the way, I came to thank Grace. If it weren't for you lending me the dress and the dance shoes, I wouldn't have passed the audition so smoothly. As she spoke, she pulled out a pair of exquisitely designed dance shoes and smiled at me, feigning pure innocence. But I knew better. Her actions were deliberate. What dance shoes? I asked, my tone flat. Lily feigned surprise, her wide eyes darting toward Marcus. Marcus, you didn't tell Grace? Oh, I'm so sorry. I heard that these shoes were custom-made for you by one of your late mother's closest friends. But I didn't have suitable shoes for the audition, so Marcus lent them to me. Marcus's brows knitted tightly together as he glanced at me, visibly uneasy. Yet, seeing that I merely regarded them with an indifferent gaze, he seemed at a loss for words. It was at that moment that Lily's smile faded. Her expression faltered as she looked between Marcus and me, a hint of panic creeping into her demeanor. Could it be? Oh my God. Grace, I'm so sorry. It's all my fault. Please don't blame him. The two of them looked more like a couple than Marcus and I ever did. Still, I said nothing. Lily bit her lip, hesitated, and then abruptly bowed deeply before me, tears brimming in her eyes. It's all my fault. I shouldn't have been so foolish, dreaming of something so out of reach for someone like me. Please don't hold it against Marcus. Hearing this, Marcus shook his head in disapproval. Don't say that, he said firmly. Your hard work deserves the success you've achieved. He suddenly seemed to make up his mind and turned to face me. Grace, I didn't know those shoes were so special to you. It's too late to change what's happened, but the mistake was mine. Don't blame Lily. I'll buy you a new pair, okay? The scene before me felt cliché, painfully so. Perhaps I should have screamed, lashed out, or berated them for their betrayal. But instead all I felt was a deep, hollow exhaustion. "I'm tired. I just want to rest now," I said, curling back into the warmth of my blanket and closing my eyes. Marcus approached hesitantly, his hands outstretched as if to touch my face, but I turned away, denying him the chance. "Get some rest," he murmured, his voice heavy with guilt before leaving the room defeated. This time I wasn't going to surrender to fate. In my past life I had been too ill, too frail to defend myself when the rumors started spreading. I missed the critical window to clear my name. No matter how hard I tried to explain afterward, no one believed me. The gap between Lily and me had become insurmountable. But this time I resolved to reclaim what was mine. Who Marcus cared for, who he loved, that was his business, no longer mine. For now I was still his wife, and no one dared openly mistreat me. So I took the initiative. I sought out the leaders of the performing arts troupe and laid all the evidence before them. Though I ignored the malicious gossip, I needed them to publicly clear my name. In the end, they believed me and were willing to give me another chance. I poured myself into relentless hard work to prove my worth. Day and night, I trained in the practice room. If I wasn't rehearsing, I was studying every piece of relevant knowledge I could find. I rose before dawn and only returned home late at night, collapsing into bed without a second thought. As for Marcus and Lily, they became strangers in my eyes. I gradually withdrew from Marcus's life. I stopped being the caged bird, waiting anxiously for his return, worrying about whether he had eaten or was dressed warmly. After all, there was someone else who was more than willing to take care of him. I noticed him lingering outside the practice room many times, his gaze deep and conflicted, impossible to ignore. More than once he seemed about to enter, but he always stopped himself. When I returned home late at night, he would often be sitting on the couch, waiting. But every time he started to speak, I would cut him off coldly. "I'm tired. Whatever it is, let's talk tomorrow." And then the next day I'd come home even later, or not at all, choosing instead to sleep on the practice room floor. Eventually he stopped trying to reach out. Still, every morning, I would find a freshly prepared meal waiting on the dining table. And every evening the thermos was always filled with hot water. We became little more than strangers sharing a roof. He seemed desperate to make amends, perhaps out of guilt, or maybe it was something else. It wasn't until I discovered that he had painstakingly repaired my worn dance shoes that I sought him out during the day for the first time in weeks. "Don't do things like this that make me uncomfortable again," I told him coolly. The joy on his face immediately crumbled into awkwardness. The tall, imposing man before me rubbed his hands together, as if handling something fragile and precious. I lowered my gaze, missing the yearning in his eyes. "These shoes weren't custom-made," he admitted softly. "I could only adjust them bit by bit to make them fit your feet." I took off my shoes in front of him, revealing my feet, covered in cuts and blisters. Breaking in a pair of ill-fitting dance shoes had come at a painful cost. Marcus just stood there, his eyes fixed on the wounds, saying nothing. But his body betrayed him. He couldn't stop trembling. Maybe, just maybe, he finally realized how wrong he had been. Chapter 8. The days of intense practice were monotonous, even boring, but I didn't mind. I embraced it all wholeheartedly. But my friends? They couldn't take it anymore. One day, they dragged me out of the studio against my will. "No matter how important this opportunity is, it's not worth wrecking your body. Come on, let's catch a performance together," Emma said, her voice dripping with mystery as she pulled me outside. Seeing her youthful face made a wave of nostalgia wash over me. In my last life after my injury, I'd been too scared to face reality and avoided anything remotely related to dance. But Emma? She never gave up on me. She'd always encouraged me to get back on stage. Back then, she often dragged me to watch performances. Even though I couldn't dance anymore, I could still admire others chasing their dreams. But every time I came home afterward, I'd sink into a deep sadness. Guess what? Tonight, we'll get to see Miss Victoria's solo performance. Grace, isn't she your all-time favorite? Emma said, waving the program in my face with a smug grin. I froze for a moment, and a spark of excitement lit up inside me. That's right. In my last life, I'd missed Miss Victoria's solo performance and regretted it for years. But now I finally had the chance to make up for that lost moment. What was there to hesitate about? We soon arrived at the Grand Theater. The place was packed with people, a sea of eager faces. Emma and I surged forward, quickly blending into the crowd. That's when we spotted Sophie, sweating bullets as she stood near the ticket counter, tiptoeing and shouting our names. Grace, I'm almost at the front of the line. Hurry over. Emma and I fought our way through the crowd inch by inch. But just as we turned the corner, I caught sight of Lily, her arm looped through Marcus's, the two of them walking into the theater under the guidance of a staff member. #### Chapter 9. Maybe we were too close, or maybe fate was just playing its cruel games. They saw me too. Instinctively, I didn't want to ruin their good mood. I gave a small nod and turned to find my friends. Lily's face lit up with a smug smile, as if flaunting their growing closeness. But when Marcus saw my near indifferent reaction, his first instinct was to shake off Lily's hand. A flicker of unease crossed his face. The crowd was chaotic, and Emma and I soon got separated. We shouted each other's names, trying to meet again. Finally, just as we were about to reunite, someone shoved me hard. Grace! Emma screamed, her voice filled with panic. Ahead of me was a steep set of stairs. If I fell, I'd likely hit my head and end up badly injured. In that instant, Marcus came rushing toward me, his long strides eating up the distance in mere seconds. I shut my eyes, bracing for the inevitable pain. But instead of hitting the ground, I found myself in his arms. Grace, are you okay? Did you get hurt? His voice was full of worry as he carried me up the steps. I shook my head, struggling to free myself from his grip, deliberately ignoring the concern in his eyes. The moment my feet touched the ground, I stepped away from him, putting as much distance between us as I could. Soon, Emma and Sophie came running over, their faces glowing with excitement. Grace, we got the tickets. Emma waved them triumphantly. Then she noticed Marcus. Her eyes darted between the two of us, and she couldn't resist teasing. No wonder you didn't come with us. You already had a date. I shook my head and barely spared Marcus a glance. I had no idea he'd be here. Marcus looked at me, a faint ache flickering in his chest. As Emma and Sophie chattered about the performance, they lamented the fact that they wouldn't be able to sneak backstage to see Miss Victoria. Surprisingly, Marcus, who was usually reserved and aloof, spoke up. I can take you backstage. Before we could react, he led the way into the theater. Emma and Sophie each grabbed one of my hands, their faces brimming with excitement. I felt a mix of emotions swirling inside me, but the longing to see my idol won out over everything else. Marcus, who are these people? Lily's voice rang out as we entered the backstage area. She was chatting with a staff member, her confident and elegant demeanor shining through. It made sense. Ever since she and Marcus reconnected, he had treated her like she was the center of his universe, catering to her every whim. Marcus walked over to her but instinctively turned back to look for me. When he realized I had already drifted far away, his hand clenched and then fell limp at his side. Emma, Sophie, and I wandered through the backstage area, taking it all in while I avoided anything that had to do with him. Marcus stared at his empty hand for a long time, lost in thought. #### Chapter 10. Miss Lily, I heard you've got some exciting news. When do we get to celebrate with some wedding candy? Someone teased. Lily's cheeks flushed pink, and her gaze fluttered shyly toward Marcus. Everyone present could tell that the relationship between them wasn't simple. What's going on, Grace? That girl seems awfully close to your Marcus, Sophie said, her sharp eyes glinting as she spoke. I could tell she had noticed my deliberate efforts to avoid Marcus long ago. I shook my head lightly and murmured, "Yeah, they're good friends." Even though the backstage area was bustling and noisy, Marcus somehow caught my response. His fists clenched tightly, and a flicker of emotion I couldn't quite interpret flashed in his eyes. The staff member joking around with Lily nearby had a habit of running his mouth. He was working just a few feet away from us, and soon enough snippets of gossip reached my ears. "Did you see that? That's the star of our performing arts group. Word is, all her outfits come straight from High City, courtesy of Marcus pulling strings to get them for her. Can you blame him? I mean, Lily's stunning and talented. They're like the perfect match." "Totally. They're the textbook definition of a power couple." I glanced down at my own worn-out outfit, something I had sewn myself. The pattern was plain, the fabric cheap. It wasn't flown in from High City, and no one had bent over backward to get it for me. Before I could dwell on my thoughts, Marcus strode over, grabbed my hand, and thrust a gift box into it. "This is our first anniversary gift. See if you like it," he said, his tone casual yet firm. Before I could even protest, he opened the box to reveal a delicate women's watch. Without hesitation, he took it out and fastened it gently around my wrist. The room fell silent. Everyone's eyes shifted subtly, their gazes filled with curiosity and intrigue. Just as I was about to pull my hand away, someone's voice broke through the tension. "What's all the excitement about today?" "It's Miss Victoria," someone whispered in awe. Lily immediately brightened up, flashing a radiant smile as she stepped forward to greet her. "Miss Victoria, it's been so long. You look as stunning as ever." Victoria, a renowned dance artist, lit up at the sight of Lily. "Oh, you're that little Lil who used to follow Marcus around everywhere, aren't you? My, how time flies. You've grown so much. I'm sure your parents would be thrilled to see how well you're doing." Tears welled up in Lily's eyes as she clasped Victoria's hands tightly. "Yes, it's all thanks to Mark helping me find my way again that I get to stand here and see you today." Victoria patted her hand with a teasing smile. "Well, you two were inseparable as kids. If he didn't help you, who would?" At her comment, Lily shot me a fleeting, almost imperceptible glance. "Mark has done so much for me. If it weren't for him supporting me, I don't think I'd have had the courage to step back on stage. Over the past 2 years, he's taken care of everything for me, my living arrangements, meals, everything. I owe him so much," she said, her words laced with a subtle air of triumph. She was showing off, flaunting Marcus's devotion in front of me. In the past, I would have fallen right into her trap. I would have confronted Marcus, demanding to know where I stood in his heart. I would have cried hysterically, screamed uncontrollably, and made a complete spectacle of myself, a perfect foil to her grace and composure. But not anymore. This time I wouldn't play the role she wanted me to. The memories of my past life felt like a distant nightmare, one I had already lived through. Marcus has always been someone who shoulders responsibility. Every time Lily needed him, he was there. Every achievement of hers, every award, he was right by her side. If it weren't for me, they would have been the perfect power couple. I still remember the day she stood on the award stage. I could only dream of, tears streaming down her face as she dedicated her success to the one person who couldn't be with her. The youngest dance goddess of our time, they called her. The entire internet was abuzz, marveling at her talent and lamenting her heartbreak. Only I sat alone, locked in my room, endlessly replaying her award-winning performance. The dance she performed was called Devotion. When reporters later asked her about its deeper meaning, she shared a knowing smile with the tall man by her side. With a voice soft yet resolute, she replied, "Because I've only ever loved one person in my life. He's not just my soulmate but my mentor, my inspiration. Every bit of my brilliance comes from him, and every honor I receive I share with him." The world was captivated by their story. a perfect match celebrated by all. And me? I lay alone on the cold floor of my apartment, dragging a blade across my wrist. Because that dance devotion wasn't hers. It was mine. But I could never perform it again. The flood of painful memories hit me like a tidal wave, leaving me struggling to breathe. I yanked my hand out of Marcus's grasp, stumbling backward instinctively. "Watch out!" Marcus reacted instantly, noticing the prop box behind me. He pulled me into his arms just as I was about to trip. "You okay? You're drenched in sweat," he murmured, pulling out a handkerchief to dab at my forehead. Victoria, who had been chatting with Lily, glanced over at us, surprise flickering across her face. She never thought she'd live to see the day her nephew would be so tender and protective toward a girl. "Mark, why don't you introduce me properly?" Marcus still hadn't let go of my shoulder. "Aunt Ruby, this is my wife, Grace." Lily's face turned ghostly pale. She shot me a resentful glance before looking away. I was still caught in the haze of emotions from my past life, feeling a little out of sorts. But Victoria had always been a role model in my life. I remembered that soon, she would leave the country with her husband to chase her dream of a career in dance. I never fully understood the connection between Marcus and Victoria back then. Seeing Victoria's curious gaze directed at me, I quickly greeted her. "Hi, Miss Victoria. I'm Grace, and I'm also one of your biggest fans." The last part came out in a tiny whisper, but Victoria caught it. She waved her hand dismissively and, to my surprise, grabbed mine with a delighted expression. "Are you a dancer too? Your proportions are so good. It'd be a shame if you didn't go professional." I nodded blankly, mustering up the courage to reply. "Yes, I'm preparing for my dance exams right now." Her eyes sparkled with excitement. When she talked about dance, her passion was evident in every word. No wonder Mark insisted I extend my stay for a couple of days. "Got it. You're hoping I can coach the two of them, right?" She directed this question to Marcus without waiting for an answer. Before he could respond, Victoria was already pulling both Lily and me to the side, asking us to show her some basics. This was the dream I'd longed for in my previous life, now within reach, yet I found myself hesitating. I instinctively glanced at Marcus, only to notice that his gaze lingered on me longer than I expected, though he still occasionally turned to acknowledge Lily. I lowered my eyes. In my past life, I hadn't known about his connection to Victoria. Maybe if I'd been more patient, more understanding, Marcus would have made it up to me, just like he said he would. But why should I wait? That dance was mine. The costume was mine. The shoes were mine. Just because I was his wife, did that mean I had to keep giving in, sacrificing what was rightfully mine, just to earn his so-called compensation? His attitude alone was proof enough that, in his heart, I would always come second to Lily. For a fleeting moment, my mind flashed back to the fire. Even though I was right there within arm's reach, he never once looked at me. He shielded Lily the entire time. The second choice never wins. I seemed to feel the searing pain of the flames again, instinctively curling in on myself, searching for a safe place. Marcus frowned and strode toward me. "Grace, Aunt Ruby's waiting for your performance." He looked at me with concern. In the reflection of his dark eyes, I saw my pale face staring back at me. Taking a deep breath, I forced a smile for Victoria. "Sorry, I'm not feeling my best today." Victoria studied me, her expression thoughtful. And then she glanced at Marcus. Lily, on the other hand, had already eagerly shown off the results of her years of hard work and dedication. I clenched my fists tightly, my nails digging into my palms until my fingers turned white. Finally, I forced myself to extend my arms in preparation, willing away the memories of my past life. Victoria nodded approvingly. "You're definitely a natural talent. By the way, Grace, are you planning to apply to an arts troupe like Lily?" I looked at her and shook my head gently. "No, I'm setting my sights on another company. Marcus stood a short distance away, his expression filled with shock. Chapter 14. After watching Victoria's performance, I left with Emma and Sophie before the event ended. Lily had suggested staying behind to see Victoria off, but I deliberately ignored Marcus's hesitant attempts to stop me. The walk back was unusually quiet on my part. But Sophie tugged at my hand, looking at me intently. Grace, be honest with me. Is something going on between you and Marcus? Emma looked confused, glancing between the two of us. What? No way. They're the perfect couple, aren't they? Come on, Marcus practically worships Grace. Sophie rolled her eyes and gave Emma a light knock on the head. Can't you tell? There's clearly something off between Marcus and Lily. I sighed helplessly. Me, Marcus, and his childhood sweetheart Lily. It was a tangled mess that couldn't be unraveled, no matter how hard I tried. In my past life, I might have tried to sort it all out. But now, I was ready to let them have each other. It's not something I can explain in a few words, I said quietly. But I've made up my mind. I want to leave Marcus. Both of them stared at me wide-eyed. I repeated myself more firmly this time. I want a divorce. They both gasped audibly in unison. Are you out of your mind? Emma grabbed my shoulders and shook me like crazy. Marcus is such a catch. If you leave him, you'll never find someone as good as him again. Think this through. Sophie chimed in as well. What could possibly be so bad that you're thinking about divorce? Grace, don't do something you'll regret. Yeah, to everyone else he was the perfect husband, accomplished, caring, and, on the surface, attentive. By the standards of this era, our marriage was already considered ideal. But I didn't want to keep pretending. Stopping in my tracks, I turned to look at the two of them. Perhaps to you all, Marcus was merely helping a friend. But to me it was a hurdle I could never overcome. Lily has always stood between us. I can't shake the frustration. I can't pretend she doesn't exist. Our life now feels like a half-cooked meal, impossible to spit out, yet impossible to swallow. It's driving me insane, so I choose to let go. The truth is, I've never been a smart person. In fact, in some ways I've been stubborn to a fault. In my last life, even though I knew his heart wasn't with me, I forced myself to endure 12 long years by his side. If not for that raging fire, perhaps we would have continued our entanglement, dragging each other down in mutual resentment. Now that I've been given a second chance, maybe this is heaven's way of urging me to let go. I once thought about taking revenge on them, but if I were to tie my life to theirs again, where would the meaning of rebirth be? Forgive me for being an ordinary person. I don't have the clever schemes or the ruthless resolve. I just want to slowly reclaim myself piece by piece. Chapter 15. After my last performance, Marcus started appearing around me more often. Perhaps he was trying to make up for some regret from our past life, and because of that I stopped avoiding him as much. Our days felt like they had rewound to a time long ago. I threw myself into my work with renewed energy. Finally, 3 months later, I passed the audition for a dance troupe. This time there were no rumors, no whispers. The troupe welcomed me with open arms. What surprised me, though, was that Lily didn't follow the same path as before. In my past life, she had stayed with her original performance troupe for 2 years. But now, like me, she chose to leave her position as lead dancer and join a different troupe. I couldn't understand why she did that. If it was merely to compete with me, it seemed a bit too childish. Because at this point, she wasn't as famous as she would later become. She hadn't yet competed in that major dance competition, nor achieved the accolades and glory that once defined her. After completing the onboarding process for my new troupe, I stepped outside and found Marcus waiting for me, holding a bouquet of red roses. They were once my favorite flower, passionate, vibrant like flames. For you, he said. His eyes sparkled with a trace of joy as he carefully held the flowers out to me. But I shook my head and declined. Why? Do you not like them anymore? I didn't know if he was asking about the roses or something else entirely. I looked up at him, meeting his gaze with unwavering clarity. I still like roses, I said, but I don't like them when they're given to me by others. Marcus froze dumbfounded. In that moment, all his persistence seemed to crumble into a cruel joke. I turned and walked away, my steps resolute, never once looking back. Just when I thought everything had settled, the Marcus family invited me over to their home. Chapter 16. I knew that, deep down, the Marcus family didn't care much for me. It was because I was an orphan. But aside from Ruby, who was still too young and wore her feelings on her sleeve, the others at least maintained a facade of politeness. At the dinner table, Marcus's father wiped his mouth and, for the first time, addressed me formally. Grace, I heard you're planning to join a dance troupe out of town. Have you and Marcus discussed what to do? What happens if you have children in the future? It was a practical question, and I wanted to use this opportunity to make things clear. Dad, Mom. I began, but Marcus cut me off abruptly. I've already submitted a transfer request. I'll move to where Grace is. Marcus's father didn't explode in anger, but his face darkened considerably. He stared at his son for a long while before finally speaking. This is your decision. If you've thought it through, your mother and I won't stop you. But Marcus reached for my hand, his gaze firm. As long as Grace is happy, that's all that matters. Looking into his eyes, my heart wavered. After returning from the Marcus home, I couldn't hold it in any longer. As soon as we stepped through the door, Marcus, I think we should separate. His face turned pale as a sheet, and his tall frame trembled. No, Grace. I know I made mistakes before. Can you give me one more chance? I took a step back, feeling as if I no longer recognized this man. Changing your job isn't something to be taken lightly, Marcus. I hope you won't make decisions you'll regret. As for us, the despair in his eyes pierced through me, but I steeled myself. Even if you refuse, I'll still file for divorce. Marcus, not every mistake comes with a second chance to fix it. If I forgave him, who would make amends for the version of myself from my past life? Chapter 17. In the end, Marcus's transfer request wasn't approved, but my new life had already begun. The night before I left, Marcus didn't sleep a wink. I knew what he wanted to say, but it was too late. Life in the dance troupe was grueling. Everyone worked hard and was immensely talented. I had to push myself even harder than before. Marcus often sent me letters. His words, like his demeanor, were always brief and to the point. I rarely wrote back. Our relationship grew more and more distant. I could feel it. Soon there would be nothing left between us. A year ago, I entered the competition for the highest national dance award. Step by step, I fought my way to the finals. I never expected that on the day of the finals, I would see Marcus personally escorting Lily to the venue. He looked thinner, his face carrying a hint of weariness. I stood there frozen, my chest heavy with an ache I couldn't suppress. See, love, or the absence of it, is so painfully obvious. Marcus saw me. His eyes lit up, but the joy quickly turned into panic. He left Lily behind and hurried toward me. But I had already turned and walked away before he could reach me. On the stage of the finals, I danced again. From where I stood, I could see him in the front row, his gaze filled with anticipation. This time, I completed the dance I had failed to finish in my previous life. But now my eyes held only the spotlight, and I saw no one else. Chapter 18. In the end, I won the gold medal. As for Lily, her performance fell short, and she didn't place at all. Standing on the highest podium, I kissed the stage once more, tears streaming down my face. I had finally reclaimed everything that was mine. In the audience, Marcus's eyes were red, but he clenched his fists tightly, his gaze filled with an endless despair I had never seen before. As I left the theater, Marcus stopped me. Seeing the pain and regret in his eyes, Something clicked in my mind. I motioned for the others to leave us. You've come back too, haven't you? The moment he opened his mouth, I knew I wasn't the only one who had been reborn. Marcus stared at me greedily, as if to confirm that I was standing there, alive and well. Yet, he buried his face in his hands in anguish. I didn't know that dance was yours, he choked out. I remember now. She asked me for your dance video, saying she wanted to help you fulfill your dream, so I gave it to her. I'm sorry, Grace. I'm sorry. It was me. It was me who destroyed your hope again and again. Marcus didn't know how to face me, his wife. How could he have forgotten? He knew how much Grace loved dancing. Yet because she was his wife, he convinced himself that Lily, so helpless and alone, needed those opportunities more. And so, he made one mistake after another. But why? Those dreams were Grace's and hers alone. What right did he have to hurt her under the guise of so-called fairness? Now, he finally understood. At that moment, I let go of everything from my past life. I don't want to continue hating you. It's exhausting, I said calmly. Marcus bent over in pain, but I had already walked away, my steps steady and resolute. This is where we end. Epilogue. After returning home, Marcus quickly filed for divorce. He took full responsibility for everything, refusing to let anyone disturb me. Later, he sent me a long letter. He wrote that, on the day of the fire, he hadn't actually found me. He had saved Lily simply because she was closer. He also wrote that he had never truly loved Lily. Later, after discovering my charred body in the wreckage, he had turned gray overnight and in his despair, jumped from a building while holding my remains. I already knew. After that day, I began dreaming of my past life. Marcus had withdrawn all his support for Lily. As someone who had also returned from the future, he knew by then that Lily's ambition had driven her to harm others repeatedly. She received the punishment she deserved. And Marcus, from that point on, was plagued by a chronic illness, coughing up blood for the rest of his days. As for me, I immersed myself in my dance career, never stopping, never looking back. The end.